Hello, welcome to 2024. Can you believe it? 2024. Well, it is, and I'm back with a new haircut, as you can see. Ready for the new year, ready for action. This episode is a little different. It's just given over entirely to an interview. This is with Kieran Shepherd, who is from F5. And we're talking about identity, obviously. Now, you might think, well, that's strange, a guy from F5 talking about identity. Well, I think it just proves that identity is now everything. And it's not just about identity access management. It's not just about the apps that we have to manage identity. It's increasingly being built into architecture, being built into hardware, built into networking, in fact, which is where F5 comes from. So sit back, enjoy this interview with Kieran, and also a little bit of AC/DC in there as well. And I'll see you on the next one. Oh yeah, Pam is off sick at the moment. She's been reprogrammed, so hopefully she'll be back in the next episode. But I'm sure we'll see her and maybe some of her friends in the near future. Anyway, here's Kieran and me. Yes, welcome Kieran, who is a solution architect at F5. Hello, welcome.
Hello.
Yes, and we were just talking about your guitars in the background and how you like to play them. Is that when you get stressed?
Yeah. Plug in the amp when I'm stressed, and put it to number 11.
So you might get stressed on this, so feel free to give us a tune at any time. So I'll be be happy to maybe a bit of Guns N' Roses, perhaps.
That's it. Yeah, I'm thinking I should have bought a drum kit.
Yeah, or actually the intro to Thunder, which I think
AC/DC.
I think it was one of the hardest bits of guitar ever. I heard that Angus Young even gets nervous every time he has to do that. Because
it's a big stretch, especially if you've only got little hands,
Yeah, and he is quite little.
Yeah.
So anyway, we're talking about what are we talking about? Erosion of trust in identity or identities, which is obviously a big subject. And we are going to talk about, I think, the impact of artificial intelligence on that and how that's impacting not only the side that we're on, but also the side that the attackers are on. Also, obviously, when stuff gets invented, it's not just the industry that can use it; it's the criminals who quite often are more innovative anyway than in using this stuff. So let's first of all let's just talk about the difference between what you might see as identity management and access management, because the two are obviously intertwined, related, but there is a difference. So what do you think is the difference?
But the way I kind of see it is, the identity is there to keep everybody out. You can't come in unless your name's on the list. But the access management is there to not only keep the bad guys from wandering around, but also prevent good guys from wandering where they shouldn't. So, just because you've got access to something, let's say a building, doesn't mean you should have access to every room with that single identity. And that's where, the difference between I've got an identity, I've been authenticated, I should be allowed to do something, compared to, well, what should you be allowed to do based on that identity? And that's where the access management comes in. Can I go into this building? Can I go into that room? Can I access this document?
Yeah, I was doing some work actually, and single sign-on came up, and this was portrayed as a good thing, single sign-on, because it meant that people could have access to, well, as you know, lots of stuff all at the same time. And I thought, well, actually, single sign-on isn't quite such a great idea these days. I mean, obviously, it is convenient.
Yeah,
but there's a high level of trust in that, and there's a high level of sort of standing privilege. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, I mean, like you say, we've got these single sign-on technologies where it's not unusual to us. We use them in our organization. Kind of see it is, the identity is there to keep everybody out. You can't come in unless your name's on the list. Um, but the access management is there to not only keep the bad guys from wandering around, but also prevent good guys from wandering where they shouldn't. So, just because you've got access to something, let's say a building, doesn't mean you should have access to every room with that single identity. And that's where, the difference between I've got an identity, I've been authenticated, I should be allowed to do something, compared to, well, what should you be allowed to do based on that identity? And that's where the access management comes in. Can I go into this building? Can I go into that room? Can I access this document?
Yeah, I was doing some work actually, and single sign-on came up, and this was portrayed as a good thing, single sign-on, because it meant that people could have access to, well, as you know, lots of stuff all at the same time. And I thought, well, actually, single sign-on isn't quite such a great idea these days. I mean, obviously, it is convenient,
Yep.
but there's a high level of trust in that, and there's a high level of sort of standing privilege. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, I mean, like you say, we've got these single sign-on technologies where it's not unusual to us. We use them in our organization. Most people rely on a federated identity store these days, like a Microsoft or a Google, or something like that. Um, you are putting still an inordinate amount of trust in that wherever that centralized identity store, that someone is still controlling the access rights. So again, I have it with my system where someone sends me a link. I sign on with my single sign on, that works, but it still tells me, look, you're not authorized to view this document, and I have to click a button to request authorization. So there are kind of some guardrails you put in.
Mm.
I
So
always
yeah,
think,
yeah. So single sign-on with some kind of MFA is better than single sign-on.
yeah, I mean, I always think
Sure.
the benefit of single sign-on is actually the single sign-off.
Right. Yeah.
If I'm an organization and I leave the company tomorrow, I don't want to have to understand the 15, 20, 100 different applications that that user has access to and remove their privileges. If I can just delete them from the federated database, knowing that
Mm.
they can't get access to all them, that's a bigger benefit for me.
Okay. All right. Let's just talk about some of the stuff that we kind of, which is kind of new technologies, including AI, biometrics, etc. Um, where we are with that, because AI is obviously, it's talked endlessly about, even though it's not exactly new, but the ChatGPT thing seemed to uh, usher in this rush of AI everything. Um, what's your view on what AI can do for the cybersecurity vendors
Yeah.
and identity vendors, and probably more pertinently, what it might do for the attackers?
Yeah. I mean, like, double-edged sword, definitely. Um, there is a huge advancement that comes with being able to leverage AI, and especially from the attacker's point of view, the access that they've got to tools that are available. I did a talk before Christmas for some CISOs around AI, and I was with my colleague putting the presentation together the morning before, and he said, "Hey, do you remember that video you did for me? That presentation? I found an AI application now that can make you speak fluent Dutch, so I can just give it to my Dutch audience."
Yeah.
And it even made my lips sync to the Dutch, so it didn't look like I was in an old kung fu movie dubbing over the top. It actually looked like I was speaking. I was like, "Wow, this is amazing!" So it was called Hey Gen, and I had a look at it. I mean, you can sign up for a
Mm.
free account and you can create an avatar. You can do the face swap, so it puts your face on there. You don't even have to write the script. You can get AI to generate what you want to say by just putting in a few topic keywords. And
Yeah.
obviously, that's like spoofing on steroids now. If I can now pretend to have the knowledge and impersonate something, using technology like that, from an attacker standpoint, it makes my life quite easy.
So how would they use that? Do you think they could actually impersonate an admin or something? Like,
Yeah, I mean, if we look at all of the kind of smishing, vishing, phishing, different types of, that involve a user, it could be as simple as impersonating voices from a known authority, impersonating your CEO on the phone, using recorded AI. And I always do you remember the Home Alone movies? They're always on at Christmas as well. And Kevin sits there with a tape recorder and he's trying to have a conversation with someone on the phone by playing these pre-recorded pieces of tape from his dad or something. And AI can do that now, but without the complexities of a kid with a tape recorder.
yeah,
It can listen and respond based on, and it can do that in impersonated voices based on just listening to a few clips of video or audio that there's probably a CEO doing a presentation on YouTube that you can grab that from anyway. So, from phishing scams, you could easily create something, knowing the vernacular of an
yeah.
organization, by learning bodies of text, you can formulate your phishing emails in the right way. It just helps to give you that edge. With things like phishing and vishing, we're talking about there's a human involved, and it's can the human there's loads of misspelt characters, and my Nigerian cousin isn't going to give me $3 million. That's probably easy to come, but these days they're very, very well finessed, especially the spear phishing campaigns that are targeting high value individuals. If you can leverage
But
AI for that.
but they wouldn't be able to crack facial recognition, as in like on your phone, and a biometric such as a fingerprint, surely. Uh,
No, I mean
because
there's go on.
that's a three. When you do your facial, it's a 360 or 180-degree image that it takes. So an AI full on face on wouldn't surely confuse a biometric device.
No, well, I mean, even as far back as 4 or 5 years ago, there were studies where I think they took, he might have even been the president at the time, or there were some high value individuals where there was enough public footage of information of them that they could create a 3D mask,
Wow.
Mission Impossible style mask. And they managed to successfully fool some of the iPhone identification, the Face IDs, by testing these masks out. So, again, nothing's infallible. On the protection side, you can almost use that AI to pick out different data points that a human wouldn't look at when when programming things like ID technology. I mean, obviously, biometric security is a big thing. It's convenient. You can't forget it. You can't forget your fingerprint or your face. Um, but there are, it's like, well, what if your fingerprint gets hacked? You can't change your fingerprint, so you're stuffed then. So we need to, look at ways that not only if they're using this to impersonate fingerprints, can we use the AI to actually make the detection of individual fingerprints, as an example, the efficacy is much better than.
Yeah. So what can AI do, as in the AI that we're all talking about, which is the LLMs and the other bits and pieces? How could those types of tools help us combat this?
Yeah, I mean, it's so again, if we look at both sides of the coin, they are, the AI has an advantage to look at an inordinate amount of data, and a little bit like frequency analysis in cryptanalysis, pick out the common things and then correlate them. So a good example of that would be acoustic side channel attacks. There was a study put together a few years ago where they gave a large language model enough Zoom recordings that with 90% plus efficacy, it could work out what somebody was typing, by working out the keystroke sounds for different keyboards. And
Amazing.
enough data, as a human to do that, that is quite an
Well, it's
impossible task.
impossible. Yeah, yeah.
Exactly. So there's that side of things. From a protection side of things, again, it's about being able to assimilate data. So if I look at cybersecurity organizations, they are receiving, let's say, identity. They can view many billions and billions of transactions and logins, per day. And because we've now got access to this information, we can use machine learning and artificial intelligence to correlate that down. Well, we've detected these as bots. Well, what within them makes it look like bots? We've detected these as humans, actually, but these are humans that are segmented and humans that actually carried out fraud. What can we utilize within those data patterns to pull out to say, well, this is highly likely a fraudulent transaction? So there's that element of it. And the other element I've seen used really well is actually where vendors use AI to help an administrator. Because at the end of the day, a lot of this still comes down to a very small, very stretched, very budget restricted team of, security professionals. They're not growing enough of these people globally, to fulfill the job. So, rather than fighting fires, if AI can present them information that says, well, we think this is bad, and more importantly, when they look at something, maybe a log message or an event that happens, if they can say, well, what is this? Why is it happening? And what should I do about it? And they can get some real time. Well, actually, this is happening because of X. And actually, our prediction is if you add a firewall to Y, that would help solve the chain of events, the kill chain. Or actually, you're receiving a DNS DOS attack, but actually the problem is not in, the DNS. It's actually in this application. So it's giving feedback to the security administrators and the admins that I'm finding quite interesting.
Yeah, because the famous attack last year on MGM, which came down to a very basic error, a human error, when the attackers managed to ring up the help desk and they literally just said that they were the senior admin or the IT guy and were given a password over the phone. So that kind of thing, you would hope that AI might be able to prevent, or maybe it can't, because that is so sort of analog almost.
Yeah.
Like if you literally just ring up and say, oh, by the way, my name is Jack Smith, and and you've got some details off, it seems like there was no authentication done at that point. So
and
I think that, again, that's probably because of it. Probably that help desk is called about 1,000 times a day. So
I mean, if you remember years back, there was a very famous data breach with Target in the US. Target were I think it was Lockheed Martin that did the kill chain analysis on that, and the entry point was actually their heating engineers, their HVAC engineers had a remote SSL VPN login to their system, so they could obviously check on these systems and telemetry. And the attacker had got hold of one of the logins from these. I can't remember if it was a phishing scam or, again, they rang up and just said forgot password or whatever. But the point was they now had access into the network, and from that network, from the HVAC engineers, they were planting malware that was catching information from their point of sale terminals, which is how they harvested all the credit card numbers. Now, in today's world, hopefully that wouldn't happen, because there is enough logic in, and data available for ML and AI to say, well, yes, these are the AI logins, this is the right credentials, but the geolocation they're coming from doesn't meet with the statistical pattern that we normally see, or the time of day, or the access that they're using, So it's to do with the context of the traffic. So it might not stop that initial breach of credentials, but it should enable you to kill it further or closer to the chain as possible.
Well, another thing that's happening is that I've been working on some data governance reporting. Doing some report on data governance, and I've noticed that one or two vendors in that space are now starting to add in a bit of identity governance, in that they can track who has accessed certain bits of data. So anything like that, if you've got data governance and you've got identity access management, if the data governance is also doing a little bit of identity governance, then it's surely going to help. And that data itself could be used in a AI kind of stack to say, these identities seem to be looking to get into this data source, but they probably shouldn't.
Yeah, it's interesting because, and again, it almost comes down to that federation and that point of trust. what within the chain of events is there something on there that you inherently trust? So a good example of this was actually myself the other day. I had to apply for I'm a forces ex-forces veteran, so I was applying for my newly issued veterans card, and it's through the government gateway, and they needed to identify me, and I'd not used this system before, but there's a government identity gateway now where you go through the online form, and then when it requests your identity, it switches you to the app on the phone, and then it uses the RFID in your phone to read the chip from your passport and then correlates that with the photo that you've just taken to work out that you are who you say you are and that you've actually got your passport, and then allows you to carry on with the application, with the rest of your military information in, and it correlates all that together. And I thought that's a really smart use because probably one of the more stringent documents that it is to try and get hold of is a passport. There's a lot of background checks that go on. So for them to use the RFID technology that was already embedded in a passport and the technology of the phone, federate them together into this application. So that was a good example of that type of
that's
federated use.
excellent. Yeah, I've always thought that some way of using passport information with identity verification would work, and that shows that someone's already doing it, which is great.
Yeah, and I was speaking to somebody. I said I'd never ever used it, and they said, "Oh, I used this 6 months ago. I think they were doing something with their mortgage." And again, it
Yeah,
was to the identity, and again they say, "Oh, they used this government ID. I did the same thing. I scanned it, and actually in their
yeah,
case, it didn't work properly, and they ended up doing it by a paper trail anyway." But
yeah.
it's obviously been around for a while. They're improving on the tech.
Okay, all right. So we talked a lot about what criminals are doing. Um, so what we talked a lot of sort of high level about managing identities, but in your as in your job with F5, so obviously you talk to customers, end users, quite a lot, or at least you get feedback from them. Because as an analyst, I talk a lot about identity, and I talk about you know perfect solutions, or at least solutions that might work. But it was interesting to hear what actually the challenge is that real people, real admins, real security professionals actually deal with when it comes to identities.
Yeah,
And do they cut corner? Do they kind of think, we'll just hope for the best sometimes?
yeah. I mean, I, identity is now core, at least at the enterprise level, with everything we do. And I guess it goes back to that framework of zero trust, where really the DNA of zero trust is identity. Identity is now the perimeter. It's not your network firewall. It's not who
Mm.
you are, what you are, where you're coming from. It's all of that, but backed by an identity. Can you give me an identity to say want to access things? So we see. And it's not just with people as well. Building secure networks now. Everything Kubernetes is a great example where all these microservices, if they want to talk to each other now, the default is they have to at least have mutual certificate authentication, so that even
Mm,
the
mm, mm.
component parts, there's an element of trust there. It We're still reliant on federated identity, especially when people are involved. We want to make it easy, so if we can give people one username, one password, one MFA token, to log into all of their corporate applications. But then that's then becomes the weak point in the chain. So, we're seeing things around. We spoke, I think it was on our previous call, about blockchain and new technologies, and there are various things in the works that people are looking on to kind of decentralize that model as well.
So is that where? Yeah, it's great as an end user or employee, let's say, to make the difference between your customers and employees. If an employee is given federated access, that's great because, like you say, they don't have to worry about. But what's missing then is, and again, probably advanced systems could help, is that what goes on behind that uh, access point manages to do all the checks and balances that are maybe missing at the moment in federated systems and single sign-on. So we need
Yeah,
to
and
develop not the back end, but the middle end, as it were.
Yeah, and that probably goes back to that very first question. The difference between identity management and access management is,
Mm.
the federated identity is going to give us access to the kind of the front door, but then you are still relying on back end checks to say, well, is the door you want to go through, are you allowed that? And again, that could be based on context. It could be where you're coming from, what time of day you're coming from. Do you have another certificate that you can present in the background? A lot of these can be transparent and frictionless to the user, but you are reliant on that kind of back end application or middleware or SaaS based service to implement those checks and balances. To make sure that you can access the things that you're allowed to access. You probably heard the term least privilege access. Only give
Yeah, yeah,
people the things they're allowed to rather than give them everything and lock down the things they're not allowed to.
yeah. And zero standing privilege again is something that is now being talked about a lot more.
Yeah.
We're getting away from standing privileges, which is what traditional PAM systems had, and getting towards ephemeral access or just in time access.
Yeah,
Um,
and I think you say mentioned about cutting corners. It's an
yeah,
important point because from an organizational point of view, you just want to lock down everything. You're scared to death that there's going to be a breach, and your information is going to be leaked out, and your name's going to be on the front page, and that's your reputation down the drain, and probably your job gone. But if you implement, hoops and hurdles and barriers to your users, then they will implement shadow IT. If your access to your corporate file sharing is just a headache, then you'll use Dropbox or you'll
yeah,
use, another analogous service, and you'll be sharing things on the back end.
mm,
So it really is incumbent upon the people who are trying to provide the security to make it as frictionless and as simple as possible, because it's the only way you'll get adoption.
yeah. Well, that's even happening in PAM, for example. We've discovered that many organizations have more than one PAM vendor in use,
Yeah,
and that's not necessarily the PAM vendor that was chosen by either security or the IT department. It's because uh, a line of business decides they just buy their own PAM, as it were, which is another complication because now you have different types of PAM working in the organization. So it's kind of good and bad because it means a line of business sort of realizes that it needs to have uh,
yeah,
some kind
yeah,
of control. But it must be hard if you're the CISO or the CIO trying to manage all of that.
yeah, yeah. A good example was from some of the stuff I've done with anti-fraud, probably going back maybe maybe 5, 6, 7, 8 years now, where some of the retail banking vendors utilized a download or a plugin. And it was a legitimate tool. It was saying if you want to log in, we ask you to download this plugin, and it does some client side kind of malware checks. It's not a full blown antivirus, but more
Mm.
for the looking for the banking trojans like Timber and NeverQuest and TripBot and all those type of things. And the problem is, as a user, you're told by your bank, don't click on anything, don't download anything. So the adoption rate was close to zero. It was in single digit percentages. Um, the other element was that if you implement security from the IT side, you say to the guys, okay, you've got your application. Here's our software development kit. Go and incorporate it. And again, that's just headache for the back end. So you had headache for
Yeah,
the clients, headache for the system admins. So then solutions started coming to the market that were completely frictionless. They said, right, you've got your application. It injects an additional piece of JavaScript, which the client's already consuming as part of the app. And that JavaScript runs in the client browser. And in the background, it looks for malware. And then it tells the bank, it says, hey, we're not going to stop him logging in, but Kieran's logging into his retail bank. And by the way, he's got, NeverQuest installed in his browser and he probably doesn't know about it. At least they can then feed that into their fraud systems. But the adoption's then 100% because clients don't know about it. They don't care. They're just carrying on their business as normal. The back-end systems don't need to incorporate it because it's done within the chain of flow, and security becomes better for it. So, it's
yeah.
a clear example of that.
Okay, so one last thing that we wanted to talk about was blockchain, which was kind of like the chat GPT of 4 5 years ago.
Yeah.
That everybody was talking about blockchain and it was going to save the world. However, blockchain is still an important technology. It hasn't disappeared. I think that blockchain, within some kind of blockchain, is the answer to our identity problems. What do you think?
Yeah, well, I do know if you've got some Bitcoin at the moment, it's going through the roof again. I don't know if you've seen the Bitcoin
Oh,
prices. If
oh, is
that's
it?
something,
Oh,
yeah,
that's
if
good to
you've got
hear.
some
I
hidden
actually,
away in your crypto wallet
well,
there, you might want to
I've
cash
got
it.
I haven't looked at it for ages because it's been so depressing. But yeah, I have got a little bit of money invested in
Yeah,
crypto. Oh, that's good to hear.
yeah, it's again, I don't know the rhyme or the reasons behind these fluctuations. Where it's very volatile, but it's taken a very nice upward trajectory. In the last sort of 6 months. So yeah, definitely worth a look. But yeah, I mean, you're right. This is the AI is but a bit like the new crypto. Sorry, the new
Mm,
blockchain. As a blockchain technology, a lot of institutions have looked at how they can leverage that technology for different ways. From as I mentioned earlier, from an identity point of view, we're kind of looking at that as a decentralized, just like we decentralize the bank ledgers within crypto. We can everyone has a copy of it. It's spread everywhere. No one has a single control of it, and they're looking at kind of decentralized identity in the same type of format.
yeah.
Can we have a tamper-proof ledger, keep everyone's digital identities, separate them, and no one has a single control over it? I mean, it always astonishes me about how SSL, in the internet of SSL TLS, every website is encrypted, but it all feeds up to a couple of certificate authorities. They are kings.
Yeah.
Your
Yeah.
Verisign, your Thwaites, your Googles. They hold the keys to the kingdom, which is why they
Well, it's a
haven't.
bit, yeah, that seems to be the way things go, don't they? That in the end,
Yeah,
everything fluctuates. I mean, like banking is the same. There's only really two credit card systems. There's only, you know, one set of clearing and all that kind of stuff. I guess that allows some sort of standards, but it is a bit of a security risk. Do you think that uh, that in the blockchain lays the germ of a universal ID, so that one day this dream of having a single identity that would allow you access to everything, i.e., like your passport, your access to the government gateway, to medical facilities, as well as, say, Word or Office 365 in your business?
yeah. So from a technical level, I see that as absolutely possible. Um, just like I see as a technical level, we could get rid of all banks globally and run through a distributed ledger. But I think it will come down to compliance, legislation, governments. They won't want to have that type of information out of their control,
Yeah,
just like they don't with the banks.
yeah.
There's a level of assurance and reassurance that they have some level of control, even if it's in corporate tech America's enterprises that are holding this. They still feel that they've got a finger they can prod into them. At
Mm.
some point where if it goes completely decentralized, I feel there's a big level of we've now let this go, and I don't think that would
Well,
be allowed to go
yeah.
that way.
I mean, like it seems to be that we create these monster, like in whatever industry, they always end up with sort of six or seven giant corporations that dominate, like oil, for example,
Yeah.
uh, automotive, and in tech, we have basically that the whole world is run by Google, Apple, Meta,
Yeah,
Amazon. Um, and it seems to be, I know this is a bit kind of philosophical, but it seems to be the way, whatever we try to do to make things more democratic or have smaller agencies, there's always a domination.
yeah. I mean, well, for the companies you mentioned there, they've got uh, cash reserves larger than some countries.
Yeah,
They're
yeah.
$1 trillion market cap companies, or 3 trillion, I think one of them is now.
Apple is over three, yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
and
So
going up again. So
exactly,
it,
yeah. So I mean, the leverage that these companies have, not just in the corporate world, but on a the government level as well. Again, it's probably another reason why these technologies probably won't see the light of day, unless something drastically happens, and we all lose complete trust. At least we've got a backup plan, right, with blockchain.
Yeah. Okay, then. So finally, do you have just one, let's say not a prediction, but one thing you'd like to see happen 2024 in identity?
Oh, nice. Yeah. You always get asked about predictions for the next year, and the one I see more and more of every year, and just bigger and bigger, I wouldn't say attacks, but breaches happen, is through supply chain. Mm-hmm. So, a bit like this could be embedded technology within an already existing vendor, like the SolarWinds. It could be, they call it like farming off the land and things like that. So from an identity point of view, I would like to see more and more identity embedded in the systems that we purchase. Even it doesn't even have to be an enterprise level. It could be your your home, ISP router. Having some level of, or better levels of authentication that when you talk to it on your Wi-Fi network and when it talks back, and the identities can be incorporated there, so you can build identity-based networks. But again, that kind of is I'd like to say, because of a symptom of supply chain style attacks and farming off the land style attacks, which I see more and more.
Identity-based networks, I like that. I think we could talk about.
We'll coin that one.
IBN.
Main name.
Yeah. All right then. Well, Kieran, it's been a pleasure talking to you. I'm really tempted to ask you to play something on your guitar, but I won't do that. But it's been a pleasure.
Someone did do that once, and I didn't realise there's a couple of settings, at least on Zoom, where it cuts out background noise. I was playing. And they were like, we can't hear anything.
Hello to F5's distributed cloud web application and API protection solution. Comprehensive SaaS-based security for all your web and mobile applications, no matter where they're deployed. You'll get integrated protection from F5's industry-leading WAF that combines signature and behavioral-based protections. Anti-bot and fraud engine to help determine in real time if app requests are legitimate or not. DDoS mitigation, delivering protections against attacks at layers 3 through 7, and advanced API discovery and control capabilities that can enforce a positive security model. Simplified policy enforcement across distributed environments makes it simple to maintain governance and compliance. You can scale in minutes to meet application growth and get rid of security bottlenecks by seamlessly inserting the service into your DevOps toolchain. There's no hardware or software to manage. Plus, you'll always know what's going on with end-to-end observability, supported by an easy-to-use API to streamline or automate deployment management. In a complex world, you don't have time to stay ahead of every security risk. Simplify your path to effective security and peace of mind with F5 distributed cloud web application and API protection.